State Department, and also as Assistant Secretary of State, Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in the United States. So we are delighted to have everyone here. Let me start also by introducing a group of our Reischauer Policy Research Fellows, who also will be giving commentary today and have helped in the preparation of this task force report. First of all, from the Neve Denny, who is the coordinator of the Reischauer Center. Secondly, Vivian Chen, who is also a Reischauer Policy Research Fellow. Sam Frost, Reischauer Policy Research Fellow. And Ayane Nakano, also with the Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies. We also have other participants. Monica Weller is a Reischauer Policy Research Fellow. And then finally, Evan Sankey, also a Reischauer Policy Research Fellow. And later you will hear from all of these people, and in particular at some length from Ambassador Scheer in terms of his commentary. Let me first, however, go brief details. If the others, people could leave the stage now, and we'll go to the details of the report itself. We all believe that, and we all know that, of course, there are important pre-existing trends in East Asia that preceded COVID-19. Our focus here is the impact of COVID-19, but deepening US-China tensions, the situation in Hong Kong, fluidity and conflict patterns on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, President Trump met down in Singapore last June with Kim Jong-un, and since then there's a series of developments in Korea. So there are a range of things, and Ambassador Scheer will be going into those in greater detail that of course preceded, but then COVID itself has intensified pre-existing trends in some important ways. Our report makes several simple but important points. First of all, we believe that East Asia's generally successful response to COVID-19 is accelerating its geopolitical rise. Obviously, there are variations by country. The countries we'll be looking at particularly are China, South Korea, Taiwan, of course, is a part of China, but Taiwan's unique situation, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore. So China certainly is one pattern. It's by no means the only beneficiary. The Asian tigers are also benefiting, and in certain respects, more so going forward. The impact of COVID-19 on China is mixed. East Asia, and we also will get into issues relating to medical supply. For example, the question of medical, the reshoring tendencies in the United States, Congress, and its recent activities. And so there are some important medical supply issues that we will consider. Regarding the specific countries, let me just summarize, and then China, of course, was the first out of the pandemic. Of course, particularly in Wuhan, of course, there was a very severe lockdown, deeply felt sacrifices, Economic effects were severe at first. The first quarter GDP fell sharply, but those economic effects are receding. There's a stimulus package that we'll discuss. Digitalization was accelerated in many ways. On the political side, of course, a sense of domestic unity and common purpose flowing from the sacrifice. But then China also has capitalized on its early exit from the crisis to extend its influence in various ways, and we'll discuss that. Ambassador Scheer will consider that in some detail. In the case of Korea, it was also very quick out of the pandemic, as China was, which has led to some deeper economic relationships. This early exit also helped with government legitimacy. As we'll see, the Moon administration benefited politically, and the National Assembly elections went very smoothly for them. There's an important issue that we will consider of North Korea, of North-South relations, how and in what ways it finds the Seoul's overtures attractive, what possibilities might exist for revived North-South dialogue. In Taiwan, Taiwan was, as we'll see, relatively effective in its COVID response, leading to domestic, more logistic legitimacy and a changing international role. In the case of Singapore also, which we consider in our report, problems with guest workers, but relatively successful in containing COVID-19 and playing an important role in medical supply. The big question that we will address toward the end is Japan. Enormous potential, of course, as the largest creditor in the world, the number 3 economy in the world, sophisticated technology, a seemingly positive COVID-19 record in terms of declared infections and morbidity. Ambiguities remain. Has Japan been successful? How successful? How do we know? What will its future role be, given the scale of the economy and the changing political economy of the region? So many questions. We're fortunate, as I mentioned before, to have researchers who have also been working, who specialize on East Asian political economy and who've been working intensively on this question, on the various questions here. We thought to make this webinar as concise as possible. They would speak very briefly to highly focused questions. China, some important questions regarding China are the first things. And one question is the nature of Chinese stimulus. The United States, of course, has a two package and more. Congress has been talking about more. How does China relate to that? What's the scale of the stimulus and how is it constructed? To speak to that issue, Evan Sankey has background relating to this here. Yes, Evan.
Hello. Thanks for the question. Yeah, China's coronavirus era stimulus package is approximately the same size in absolute terms as its stimulus package after the global financial crisis of 2008. So it's just over 550 billion US dollars. But since China's economy is, of course, much larger today than it was in 2008, that's a smaller share of GDP. So today's Chinese stimulus package is about 4% of GDP. In 2008, it was about 13% of GDP. The package seems weighted towards tax cuts, automatic stabilizers. They've been sending out consumption vouchers, essentially, that have some, you lose them in an effort to prevent people from saving. It also seems like there are infrastructure provisions of the new stimulus package. They are a smaller share of the stimulus package. And it seems like they're also geared towards different types of infrastructure. Stimulus was famously heavy on hard debt financed infrastructure like high-speed rail and airports and bridges.
How large is the Chinese stimulus as a share of GDP relative to other major nations?
It's quite small. At 4% of GDP for China versus, depending on how you measure it, 12% for the US, 21% for Japan, 13% for South Korea. Mm-hmm. It's unclear exactly why that is. There's been some speculation that China is keeping its powder dry in order to respond to more shocks in the future.
The stimulus itself is not, relative to the economy, as massive as the last time around. It will contribute something to Chinese growth, but it's not really what is pulling, not the only factor in this situation. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Now, as of course, the question remains of what it is that is driving China's emergence from the current situation. We have another intriguing of digitalization, both in containing the pandemic in China and also in stimulating economic recovery. Of course, at the same time, it also has the effect of reinforcing government control capabilities. Vivian Chen has been looking at the issue of digitalization and its implications. Vivian?
That's correct. China has been employing a lot of its high-level technologies, especially its strong 5G network, to fight the pandemic. It has used a network specifically for powering drones to employ in a variety of settings, including consumer deliveries such as food and supplies, as well as delivering COVID-19 medical samples for testing, along with spraying disinfectant in areas and cities. In addition, China has also created, through collaborating tech giants Alipay and WeChat, a health code app, so that every Chinese citizen will be separated into 3 categories: red, yellow, and green, in that, depending on their status, prevent them from entering public venues such as malls, offices, and subway stations.
Do I understand China also has been using digitalization to build hospitals rapidly and that sort of thing?
Yes, that's correct. They have used a digital tool called Building Information Modeling, which enabled hundreds of BIM designers across the nation to collaborate to build 2 Wuhan hospitals with 2,600 beds, with drawings done within 60 hours.
Mm-hmm. I see. And so digitalization is a key element of their response. Thank you very much. If I might add another set of, on the downside, you've seen 2 positives that certainly are aiding China in responding. On the downside, thank you, Vivian. We have the BRI. And the Belt and Road Initiative, as certain parts of the world, particularly Africa, possibly South Asia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, go into debt problems because as the world economy decelerates, there's an additional debt problems are arising. BRI is being complicated. There are, of course, quality issues in some parts of the world regarding medical equipment, but certainly China has reached out. It is supplying medical equipment to many new parts of the world, particularly in the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe. There's been positive responses to that. So there are both pluses and minuses for the BRI in the implications of the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you very much, Vivian. Now, next, the question I mentioned, the Asian tigers, not simply China, but Korea and Singapore and so on. And particularly in the case of Korea, it responded quite rapidly with implications that certainly appear to be positive for relationships across the Pacific with the United States. Monica Weller has been working on the effective Korean responses, which also, as we have heard, have positive implications politically for the current government there. Monica, how could you tell us a little about how Korea has responded and why what it has been doing to address the COVID-19 situation and what implications this has for its international relations?
Okay, so Korea has had previous experience with MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, where there was a mixed government response. And so when they started hearing about cases of COVID-19, they responded very rapidly. They began developing test kits January 16th, 4 days before the first case of infection testing by selecting 5 qualified farm certification laws. And so they relied a lot on artificial intelligence-based big data systems. So they were able to effectively test. And then they also were able to essentially produce tests that would give proven results within 6 hours by January 30th.
All redounded political Moon administration, didn't it? They were able to cut infection implications of this.
The results for the Democratic Party, which President Moon is in, were mixed, but because of the positive pandemic response, and so his party won 180 of the 300 seats, and it essentially gave them an absolute majority and a 3/5 supermajority that will allow them to fast track procedures in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as we'll discuss later, that could have implications for North-South relations too. Thank you, Monica. Thanks very much. And next, we'd like to look briefly at Taiwan. Sam Frost has been looking at Taiwan's response. They've used websites, testing, mass production, and so on. Could you give us just a few words more about what Taiwan has been doing, Sam?
Yes, so Taiwan's success in combating the spread of the virus has been nothing short of remarkable. It's to date, it has 443 confirmed cases and only 7 deaths. And this success has won Taiwan not only global recognition, but it's also obviated the need for that so many other countries have had to do. And the general consensus on this success has been, it basically boils down to the speed of the response, speed of Taiwan's response made possible by a high level of preparedness and pre-existing institutions set up in the aftermath of SARS. Strictly enforced quarantines, thorough screening, and quarantines enforced by phone tracking and strict government diligence, spread and by a huge